Welcome guys to a video tutorial on how to cut a circle out of a 4mm thick glass. I first need to wear my glasses to protect myself from any glass shards that may break away while we are cutting our circle out of our glass sheet. The basic tools that we need from cutting a circle is a glass cutter, a circle cutter that cuts specifically circles, a grouser that looks like ordinary pliers, and a happy snapper to snap off any glass pieces, and a marker, a ruler for measurements, and turpentine. Use terps to lubricate our cutting line to prevent our glass from cracking. We are now going to take the circle cutter and our T ruler and measure our glass according to the circle that we want. The circle that we have in mind is 40 centimeters. So we need to ensure that 40 centimeters can fit into this square glass. So our circle radius needs to be 20 centimeters. Therefore, the circle cutter needs to be at 20 centimeters. And we just adjust our nozzle, adjust our tool according to the size, according to the radius, to cut our full circle. Ensure that you have enough room and there's nothing in your way while you're cutting your circle. When you're placing your circle cutter on your sheet of glass, make sure it is centered and there is even space around the edge of the glass so that it has an even break at the edge. Once we are satisfied with our position of the glass, we push the contraption down so that it sticks to the glass, and if we feel like our edges are too narrow to our glass cutter, we just adjust the glass cutter edge to the glass cutter. We make it smaller so that there's enough space on the edges to ensure that our glass will break freely. After positioning our glass cutter, our circle cutter, we bring in our turpentine and we take the edge of our other glass cutter and we just put a drop of turpentine at the edge of our glass cutter on the glass. Because when we now hold on to the nozzle and we run through the terps to lubricate a circumference on the glass. I take a look just to see that I've covered a nice oil line. You see a circle, a light oil circle. You apply pressure at the starting point and you complete your circle all the way around. You lift up the contraption to loosen our circle cutter. You should be able to see a rough score circumference of a circle on the surface of the glass. We now turn the glass upside down and we take the back of our glass cutter and we tap along the cutting line. Remember, your cutting line must be under the glass, and we lightly tap on the line just to find that light break of the glass. We take our two thumbs and we put pressure between the line, and we're looking for a lather in the glass to break along the circumference of the circle. And we continue doing this until the lather meets at its starting point again. This is just to release pressure from the glass. Once we see that our leather line has gone all the way around, we can hold it against the light to double check. We now take the back of our glass cutter and we tap along the circumference of the circle. This is to further break the tension within the line and get an even breakthrough throughout the cutting line. We now flip our glass sheet over on the side that we started cutting, and we now tap on the line again to further break that pressure away from our glass, from our cutting line. And we continuously take the end of our glass cutter and we tap along the side to further break away the pressure. We now take our turpentine and we now begin to cut our release lines away from our circle to make it easy for our glass to break away. There's still a lot of tension between the glass. So at an angle, there's a little bit of space between the cutting line, the circle line, and the release line. If we cut directly onto our circle line, it will cause a crack, or the release line will break right through our circle when we start breaking away. So it's always best to cut it in a 45-degree angle so that the release breaks away into the circle line and not into the direct angle. It is at a tangent. And we cut release lines 4 times, 1 at each side. You can cut as many release lines as you feel comfortable with. The more the merrier, but minimum 4, just because there are 4 pressure points on a square. Once we've cut through our release lines, we turn our glass sheet over again and we take the back of our glass cutter and we knock quite hard, give a good amount of pressure on the release line to break the circle out of its position. And we tap along the line and not against the line, so the vibration of the cutter can follow through the line and cut freely. As you can see, our circle has released and we are ready to do a painting demo in our next video. Welcome to a video tutorial on how to sieve high temp enamel on glass. We'll be using this technique to fuse paint between 2 sheets of glass, and as you can see in the video, there's a book with a design on, and the color combination with the blues and orange and greens will be between the 2 sheets of glass, and the black, which will be white in our end product, it will be a low temp enamel which will be painted on top of our glass, which will be fused after. We begin by putting on our gloves for safety and wearing a mask. It's important to wear these items because glass enamel contains lead, and when you're working with powdered paint, especially with glass enamel, it's very important to to protect yourself so that you don't breathe in these dangerous chemicals. And also, if you're pregnant, please do not work with glass enamels. You are at high risk. Have is orange, reed green, which is a turquoise dark green, and a cyan blue. Make sure your surface is clean. I like to work on white paper so I can see what I'm doing. I use a sieve, a palette knife. I always have a glass of water and a mixing bowl. The color that I'm going to start with is orange. I use the tools, the palette knife and the sieve in this process. So I pick up the palette knife, I pick up the powdered paint with the palette knife, and I throw the powder paint into the sieve over the bucket so I do not waste, and I start sieving in patches where I want the orange to lie according to my design in my book. And I continue this process with the other two colors, the blues and the green. I go back and forth with different colors, with the three colors, to ensure that I cover enough of the surface area on the glass. And I just tilt the glass, or I look at the glass at a funny angle to see any patches or any areas that I've missed, and I always just go back into the color that I need to go to. Slowly and carefully lift the glass up from the bottom. I try not to touch the top of the glass as much as possible, so I slide the glass off and lift it from the bottom. This glass will be fused, and the enamel that you see on the glass will be fused between the two sheets of glass. On our program, we start with the temperature of the kiln, which is 53 degrees. The thermostat reads 53 degrees, and we move on our right side with the arrow pointing to the right to the next step, which allows you to go into the next process, which allows you to start immediately. And we go up the ramp at 200 degrees per hour to 680 degrees, and we hold it there for 30 minutes to allow the glass to expand properly. And we go up the ramp full up to 850 degrees and hold it for 10 minutes so that the glass can fuse all around. And we go to 580 degrees and we hold it for 13 minutes and pull down to 100 to 30. Once we're satisfied with our program, we press start and we close the kiln at 100 degrees Celsius. As you can see, our glass has been fused all around and our color is in between our two sheets of glass. And now we are going to apply low temp enamel paint, which will be white. It is low temperature, so we'll go to 530 to 580 degrees. We have our tools such as our bamboo brush, our palette knife, our water, our sieve, our mixing medium, and a mixing palette. We have our gloves and our masks as well for safety. This video is to show how to apply low temperature enamel onto glass. I will demonstrate by using a sieve, a palette knife, and low temperature enamel white, which is, it says on the top 530 degrees. It really depends on the process that you go to. So we use our sieve and we sieve down our enamel powder onto our mixing palette to ensure that we have a smooth consistency for our paint. This is just to get rid of any lumps and impurities that's in our enamel. We then create a little crater in our heap of enamel powder and tap off the excess powder from our sieve. Make sure our palette knife is clean, and we take our mixing medium. Using our palette knife, we slowly just add about 2/3 of the enamel powder. The ratio is 2/3. Okay, so we take our palette knife and we mix through our mixing medium and our enamel thoroughly to ensure it is a nice consistency, it is flowing, there are no lumps, and we just mix it through. So just don't rush into this. We take our time in this process so that we get a nice gouache consistency. Any powder that you see left over, you just grind it against the glass with the palette knife to smooth out the consistency of the paint. Have now our bamboo brush, which is natural hair or animal hair. We use animal hair because it absorbs a lot more moisture into our brush, and you can just lift off more paint than synthetic hair brushes. Our bamboo brush should be soaked in water, and the amount of water that's been soaked in our brush is enough to dilute the paint and just to stretch it out further. We use water so that the enamel paint does not become too thick or gunky as it dries out through the process. Once we have our paint, low temperature white enamel paint ready mixed and ready to start applying, we first always need to make sure that our glass is clean, so that just to prevent any impurities, and it's always best to work on a clean surface. As you can see, our glass is already fused, and this is the last painting technique for this plate. We now gather some plate enamel in our bamboo brush, and we go and we paint according to our design, which is in the beginning of this video. work with a lot of lines and geometric lines. It's very spontaneous and abstract. I like to think that I'm creating a obscure face. But at the end of the day, it could look like anything that you want it to look like. I just like using this technique because the line work contrasts beautifully with the textured background. I continued this process for a while, and I just clean up the lines with a Q-tip or a piece of tissue, and if I ever make a mistake, I can always just wipe it down and start again. I like to play variation of the thickness of the lines, so it makes it more appealing to the eye. It attracts the eye, makes it more interesting, just to show the different variations of thicknesses. And once we are done painting, we just clean up the edges with a piece of tissue. If there's a smudge, we just clean the bottom. We just have a damp tissue ready just to clean up any excess that's not meant to be there. And we let the paint dry before firing, and that will be in the next video. Alright, our next step is to ensure that our plate is clean before we place it in a kiln. Our plate is prepared. Our plate is placed on a kiln which has been prepared with plaster of Paris, and our low temperature enamel paint has been dried out naturally. When we look at our kiln program, the temperature is reading 31 degrees Celsius. We look at our arrows for the next guide. The arrows pointing up and down is to increase the temperatures, and the arrows to the left and right is our steps. The first dot, which is red, is our timer, so we're starting immediately. And we are moving up our ramp at 200 degrees Celsius per hour to 400 degrees. And at 400 degrees, the glass is going to dwell or soak for 10 minutes. This is just to allow the contraction and expansion, of the glass to get used to the temperature that it is going to. We let the glass ramp up fully all the way to our top temperature, which is 530 degrees. We let our paint soak at that temperature for 15 minutes. This is just to ensure that the glass and the paint gets a consistent heating all around, and that there's no tension between the glass. Alright, and as we're coming down the ramp, it will be full down to 400 degrees. We let it soak. We don't let it soak because it's quite low. and we go straight down from 100 to 30. And once we're ready, we press start, close our kiln halfway, and we close it completely once the temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius. This is just to allow all moisture to escape from the paint out of the kiln. Hi everybody, so today we're going to now form our plate into a actual plate. We're going to form our flat plate into a plate which will be slumped in from a mold. This is a metal mold, and we will prepare this mold with a sieved plaster just so that it doesn't stick to our glass. It's always important to wear a mask in this process because breathing in plaster is very dangerous, and it forms like cement in your lungs if you do not protect yourself properly. So please make sure that you wear a mask at all times when working with plaster of Paris. We lightly coat our mold with plaster all around to ensure it is covered consistently, and we just go back in certain areas just to fill up the certain gaps where it is necessary. Once our mold is evenly coated with plaster, we are ready to place it into the kiln. Then we clean our glass and put our glass on the mold. Welcome to the video demonstration on how to slump your plate to become a plate, your glass circle into a plate. We have our mold, which is coated with plaster of Paris, and we have our clean sheet of glass or fused glass in our mold. Come to our program, which is reading 27 degrees Celsius. And we are starting immediately, going up 200 degrees per hour to 580 degrees, soaking for 20 minutes, going up the ramp at 250 degrees per hour to a top temperature which is 680 degrees, soaking for 20 minutes, coming down full down to 580 degrees, soaking for 30 minutes, 100 degrees per hour to 30 degrees as our slowing down process. Once we are satisfied with the program, we press start and make sure the red light is on, and we close the kiln halfway. Once it reaches 100 degrees Celsius in our program, we close the kiln all the way. Welcome guys to another video demonstration on how to apply enamel paint onto glass. This is just a demonstration on how to use a different technique by using a stencil method. I have prepared my gloves, my mask, my second sheet of glass, clean paper, my two colors that I'll be using, a sieve, a palette knife, and my template and scissors. I easily made this template by folding an A3 page up, and I do so by folding. I fold the page up and I then cut it down into certain shapes that I want along the edge of the folded side of the paper. color combination that I'll be using is a cherry red and a ferro and a reed color, and the temperatures that they go to is 650 to 850. So these temperatures are quite high, and we use these temperatures, these colors, at the same time while we're fusing. Our next step is to use our stencil that we have prepared. I just cut it along the side so I can create another line next to our delicate design. So I place our template in the desired area that I want it. I see that the template overlaps a little bit, so I just adjust it where I need to. I place a metal ruler along it just to level it down, so that it doesn't move. And I take another piece of paper and I place it along the design to create a thin line. This is also part of the stenciling method, just to create a solid thick line. The reed will be our base color, and the cherry red will be our pattern color, the color that we'll apply on our stencil. Please remember, this is a fusing technique with 2 high temp enamel color. Now we are using a palette knife and a sieve to apply our paint, and we just sieve down our enamel paint in our stencil. We tap quite lightly to get a good coverage in our stencil. Once we have coated our stencil over our pattern, we carefully remove the stencil, and we do that by just lifting it up slowly, just so that we don't damage our desired design. Once our stencil has removed, we can finally see how our design will look on our gloss. Our next step in the process is to sieve the desired color on our base layer, on our bottom layer of our glass. This layer is just one solid color, so all we need is our reed, our blue-green reed, and our palette knife and our sieve, and a clean surface. We gather some enamel into our sieve and we do an even coating along the surface of our glass until we are satisfied. And once we are satisfied with the coating of our surface, we remove the glass from the page, and we start preparing to put our glass into the kiln. Since this is the bottom layer, the top layer will be the design for our plate. Alright, now once the next step for this process is to place our 2 sheets of glass in a kiln. The process is fusing, so we do need to prepare a kiln shelf with a painted plaster of Paris on top. We place the bottom layer, which is a solid color, on the kiln shelf first. Then we place the top layer where our stencil technique was used on top, and we're using our fusing temperature to fuse the glass together. This is a dried applied technique, so there's no need to fire the 2 sheets of glass separately. We are allowed to fire dry only enamel between 2 sheets of glass. Now we move over to our kiln program. Our kiln program is reading 50 degrees Celsius, and since we are starting immediately, we do not need to set a timer. Going up the ramp, we are starting with 200 degrees Celsius to 680 degrees Celsius, letting it soak for 30 minutes. And we go full up the ramp to 850 degrees, which is our fusing temperature, where we will let it soak for 10 minutes, and we come down to 580 degrees Celsius, letting it soak for 30 minutes, coming down at 100 to 30 degrees Celsius. And once we are satisfied with our kiln program, we can start immediately. Pressing start. We close the kiln halfway until it reaches 100 degrees, then we close all the way. Hi everybody, so today we're going to now form our plate into a actual plate. We're going to form our flat plate into a plate which will be slumped in from a mold. This is a metal mold, and we will prepare this mold with a sieved plaster just so that it doesn't stick to our glass. It's always important to wear a mask in this process because breathing in plaster is very dangerous, and it forms like cement in your lungs if you do not protect yourself properly. So please make sure that you wear a mask at all times when working with plaster of Paris. We lightly coat our mold with plaster all around to ensure it is covered consistently, and we just go back in certain areas just to fill up the certain gaps where it is necessary. Once our mold is evenly coated with plaster, we are ready to place it into the kiln. Then we clean our glass and put our glass on the mold. Now that our glass have fused completely and our enamel has been fired, we're now ready to slump our glass into a plate. We have prepared a mold with plaster of Paris, which is coated evenly, and we have placed our plate on our mold. We go to a kiln program, and we are starting immediately, so there's no need to start a timer. Our temperature is reading 25 degrees. We're starting immediately. We're going up at 200 degrees per hour to 580 degrees Celsius, letting it soak for 20 minutes, going up the ramp for 250 degrees to 680 degrees, which is top temperature, letting it soak for 20 minutes, coming full down to 580, letting it soak for 30 minutes, coming down at 100 to 30 degrees. Once we are satisfied with our program, we press start. We close the kiln halfway, and when it reaches 100 degrees, we close the kiln completely. Hey guys, welcome to another video on how to apply enamel paint on glass. I'm wearing my gloves and my mask for protection because high temp enamel paints do have dangerous chemicals. I am working on a template which is drawn out on white paper so I can see where my black silhouette will be placed on. I am working on a clean surface of glass. I have my book with my design next to me all ready and prepared. So I have my white paper drawn with the template with the design that I want. I have my bamboo brush clean and ready. I have my sieve to sieve out any lumps. I have my palette knife. I have another small brush just in case, a bowl of water, some tissue in case I miss, and my mixing medium for my paint. And the color that I'll be using first, which is black, goes to 850 degrees. And since we are only painting a silhouette, this is the only color that we'll be using on our top layer of glass. This is for the fusing technique. For our next step, we're going to prepare our enamel paint. We are mixing black paint for our silhouette, and what we will use is our sieve, our palette knife, and our mixing bowl. We add the enamel powder onto the sieve over our tub so we don't waste, and we start sieving our enamel paint through our sieve just to get rid of any lumps or any impurities that are lying around in our enamel powdered paint. We now add our mixing medium. It's usually 2/3 to the enamel powder paint. That's the amount of medium we use. And we slowly mix that in. We grind the powder paint with the medium to create a smooth consistency for application on the glass. We clean our palette knife with the tissue which is already ready for us. We soak our bamboo brush in water so that it dilutes our paint, so that it doesn't become gunky or too thick when applying our paint on the glass. The consistency that we're looking for is a gouache-like consistency. Once we're ready, we can start applying our paint onto our glass. In our next step, we will be applying our enamel paint onto our glass. Important thing to remember is that our glass is clean. There are no fingerprints or any marks because we can't go back into it once we are done. I paint over a template so I know where exactly to position my image to get an accurate copy of my design from a book. I just start painting over the image that I've drawn on the paper, and I bleed out, I flood the paint out to create a solid silhouette image that I desire, that I've designed. And I continue this process all the way through, and once it has dried, I scratch back into the silhouette to create that fine detail like a drawing. The next video is a step on applying the same temperature, high temperature paint on the bottom layer of the fused glass. So this is the bottom layer of the glass, and we are using color as the foundation for our design. We have our paints already prepped. It's the same process as before when I was doing the silhouette technique, and we just apply according to the design from the book. When we are using wet application of the enamel paint, we cannot fuse the enamel paint between the two glass because it starts to bubble. So therefore we need to fire the two sheets of glass separately, then only we can fuse the two sheets of glass together. The bottom layer, which is our color foundation, has been fired to 850 degrees, and it has been placed on a prepared kiln shelf which was coated with plaster of Paris applied with a brush. At our kiln program, the temperature is reading 52 degrees. We are starting immediately, so there's no need to start a timer, and we're going up the ramp at 200 degrees to 680 degrees, and we let it soak for 30 minutes. We go full up to 850 degrees, and we let it soak for 10 minutes, letting it come full down to 580 degrees, letting it soak for 30 minutes. 530 degrees, letting it soak for 30 minutes, and 200 degrees to 30 degrees, and once it is ready, we can begin. Our next step is etching into our top layer of glass, and we etch to create a detailed image from our painted silhouette. The tools that we need is a needle or something sharp and a dry brush. In this video, I'm showing you on how I start and how I guide my etching process to create the image from my book. I use a pencil as well, just to guide me on where the lines will be and where it might, and just where to guide me in general. I work on a surface where I can mess and make sure I have enough paper to mess around with, and once I have all my tools ready, I can just get into it. It takes a very long process because it's highly detailed work. I personally find it therapeutic, so that's why I do this technique. So yeah, anyway, there I go. Once I pencil out, draw my image on my black silhouette as a guide, I take my needle and I scratch away the negative space to create the image that I want. And I neaten the edges just to create a more refined image along the edges, just to make it makes the image look a lot more crispier once it has fired. Once I've completed etching away my image, I use a brush just to brush off the excess and I throw that away. Then I take a tissue and I just wipe away any areas where there's any smudges or fingerprints. It's very important to keep your glass clean, so take your time in taking care. Once we have our top layer prepared and scratched and cleaned, we now prepare a kiln sharp, which is plastered Paris, which is applied with a brush, and we set down our first layer or our bottom layer, which is our color, and on top will be our scratched surface, and this combination of the two will complete the look. The bottom layer enamel has been fired already, so we don't need to stress about the enamel bubbling between the two sheets of glass. And since the top layer has enamel on top, we don't need to fire that separately. We can just go straight into fusing. We now come to our kiln program. Our kiln is reading 52 degrees Celsius. We are starting immediately, and we're going up the ramp at 200 degrees to 680, soaking for 30 minutes. Going full up to 850 degrees, soaking for 10 minutes, coming full down to 580 degrees, soaking for 30 minutes, coming down at 100 degrees to 30 degrees, and we can start our program immediately. We close our kiln door halfway, and once it reaches 100 degrees, we close our kiln completely. Welcome back, guys, and we are now going to slump our plate into a functional tableware. Our plate is now placed on a metal mold which is evenly coated with plaster of Paris. We always make sure that our plate is clean and there are no finger marks. We are now going to a kiln program where our temperature is reading 25 degrees Celsius, where we are starting immediately, going 200 degrees per hour to 580 degrees, dwelling for 20 minutes. Then we're going up the ramp at 250 degrees per hour to 680 degrees, which is our top temperature, soaking for 20 minutes, coming down at full to 580 degrees, soaking for 30 minutes, coming down at 100 to 30 degrees Celsius. We are using microprocessor as our brand. We are starting our kiln program immediately, and we close our kiln door until it reaches 100 degrees. We keep our kiln door open until it reaches 100 degrees, then we close the door completely.